They say moving is a chance for a fresh start. For me, arriving in Whisper Creek felt more like stepping into a photograph left too long in the sun, faded, silent, and deeply unsettling. We traded the constant thrum of the city, a noise I'd grown up with and weirdly found comforting, for this place nestled against woods so thick they seemed to swallow the light even at midday. Whisper Creek. Even the name felt wrong, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. The houses were neat, almost unnervingly so, lawns trimmed with a precision that felt less like pride and more like vigilance. People nodded, offered thin smiles that never quite reached their eyes, and watched. They always seemed to be watching, from behind curtains, from porch swings rocking in silence, their gazes lingering just a fraction too long as we unpacked the U-Haul. It wasn't hostile, not exactly, but it was observant, like they were cataloging us, fitting us into some pre-existing narrative we weren't privy to. My parents, of course, saw none of it. Mom was charmed by the quaintness, the antique shop on the single main street, the historical society housed in a dusty building that looked older than the town itself. Dad just wanted quiet after years of city sirens, and Whisper Creek offered that in spades. An oppressive, heavy quiet that seemed to press in from the trees surrounding us on three sides. The woods were the town's defining feature, dark and dense, a wall of ancient pines and tangled undergrowth that felt less like nature and more like a boundary. It didn't take long to hear about Ilara Thorne. Her face, captured in a slightly too bright school photo, was plastered on lampposts in the window of the general store, on the community notice board outside the library. Missing, the posters read, the ink already starting to run from the damp air. She'd vanished a few months before we arrived, walked towards the woods after school, and just never came back. People didn't talk about it openly, not to us newcomers anyway, but you could feel it hanging in the air, a cold spot in the town's forced tranquility. Then there was the legend, the Whispering Hour. Locals, the few kids my age I saw, the old woman sweeping her porch, even the cashier at the store, mentioned it in hushed tones, usually followed by a nervous glance towards the tree line. It was supposedly the hour right after sunset, when the woods changed, when the wind through the pines didn't sound like wind anymore, but like voices, whispering things you couldn't quite make out, things meant to lure you in. They said, that's when Ilara disappeared, that the woods called her. My parents dismissed it as small-town superstition, a way to keep kids indoors after dark. Their rule was simple, absolute, inside, before the sun fully set. No arguments, but even they seemed a little jumpier here, locking doors they used to leave open, peering out the windows a little more often than they used to. The quiet here wasn't peaceful, it was waiting. I spent those first few weeks in a haze of boredom and creeping unease. The house felt too big, the silence too loud. I'd sit by my window, staring out at the unmoving wall of trees, feeling like they were staring back. Sometimes I thought I saw movement deep within the shadows, a flicker of something pale, but I always told myself it was just the light playing tricks. Or maybe it was just wishful thinking, hoping for anything to break the monotony. The air itself felt different here, heavier, scented with damp earth and pine needles and something else, something faintly metallic and sweet, like old rust or drying blood. It clung to the back of your throat. I tried exploring the edges of the woods once, just venturing a few feet in where the sunlight still reached, but the silence was deafening, the feeling of being watched overwhelming. I turned back quickly, the skin on my neck prickling. Whisper Creek wasn't just quiet. It felt muted, suppressed, like a scream held back just before it escapes. There were no loud parties, no kids shouting in the streets after school, just the low murmur of conversations that stopped when you approached, the rustle of leaves, and the constant unnerving presence of the woods. I missed the city noise, the anonymity, the feeling that things happened there. Here, it felt like something had happened, something terrible, and the whole town was collectively trying to pretend it hadn't, while simultaneously bracing for it to happen again. Alara Thorne's faded smile on the posters was a constant, silent accusation. My room overlooked the backyard, which backed directly onto the forest. Every night, as dusk settled, I'd find myself drawn to the window, listening for the whispers the legend spoke of. Usually, there was nothing but the wind, maybe an owl. But sometimes, just sometimes, as the last light bled from the sky, I thought I could hear it. A sibilant, rustling sound just beyond the range of hearing, like secrets being passed on the breeze. The whispering hour. I'd quickly draw the curtains then, the simple rule of my parents suddenly feeling less like an annoyance and more like a necessary shield. The woods felt ancient, watchful, and deeply, fundamentally wrong. And I was trapped here, on its edge. My self-imposed exile didn't last. Even oppressive boredom eventually pushes you outwards. I was kicking a loose rock near the edge of the woods one afternoon, deliberately staying clear of the actual tree line, but close enough to feel its cool, damp breath. The silence was thick, as usual, broken only by the scuff of my sneaker and the distant whine of a saw from somewhere in town. That's when I heard voices, low and conspiratorial, coming from just inside the woods. Hesitantly, I peered through the ferns. 3 boys, maybe a year or 2 older than me, were huddled near a large, gnarled oak. One, with messy dark hair and an easy grin that seemed out of place in this town, was Kalen. He seemed to be the leader, gesturing emphatically. Another, built like a linebacker with watchful eyes and a perpetually skeptical frown, was Jorah. The third, Lorian, was slighter, almost ethereal, sitting cross-legged with his back against the oak, sketching furiously in a worn, leather-bound book, seemingly oblivious to the others. They hadn't seen me. I almost turned back, the ingrained unease about the woods and the town's general weirdness bubbling up. But loneliness is a powerful motivator. Kalen looked up then, his grin widening as he spotted me hovering awkwardly. "Hey, new kid, right? Silas?" I nodded, surprised he knew my name already. News traveled fast, apparently, even in silence. "Yeah," I managed. "Saw you kicking rocks. Bored?" Kalen asked, stepping out from the trees. Jorah grunted noncommittally, folding his arms. Lorian didn't look up from his sketchbook. "Kind of," I admitted. "Not much to do around here." Kalen laughed, a sound surprisingly loud in the quiet air. "Tell me about it. This place is dead. Unless you know where to look." He jerked his head back towards the deeper woods. "We got a place. Our place. Away from all this." He gestured vaguely back towards the town. Jorah shifted his weight. "Kalen, maybe we shouldn't—" "Nah, it's cool, Jorah. He looks all right," Kalen interrupted, sizing me up. "Besides, 4's better than 3 for lookouts." He winked, though I had no idea what we'd be looking out for. "Want to see it? It's called the ossuary." The name sent a small shiver down my spine, despite the warm afternoon. Ossuary. A place for bones. But Kalen's easy confidence, the first genuine spark of non-creepy interaction I'd had, was hard to resist. Jorah still looked unconvinced, and Lorien remained lost in his art, his pencil scratching rapidly across the page. "It's deep in," Jorah muttered, glancing nervously at the darkening woods behind them. "Past the old logging trail." "Exactly. No one ever goes there," Kalen countered brightly. "Totally safe. Totally ours." He looked back at me, expectant. "So? You in? Or you gonna keep kicking rocks?" The desire to belong, to find something, anything, in this stifling town warred with the prickling unease the woods inspired. The faded image of Alara Thorne flashed in my mind. But Kalen's grin was infectious, a promise of escape, of secrets shared, a place away from the watching eyes. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign. "Yeah, show me." Kalen clapped me on the shoulder. "All right, follow us, but keep quiet back there. Don't want anyone knowing the way." Jorah sighed, but fell into step, and even Lorien slowly closed his sketchbook, tucking it into a satchel, his eyes finally lifting to give me a brief, unreadable glance before turning towards the forbidden depths of Whisper Creek woods. The Hay invitation felt like a key, unlocking something I wasn't sure I was ready for. We stepped off the path and into the shadows. The ossuary wasn't what I expected. Deeper in the woods than I'd ever dared venture, past rotting logs and streams, choked with black leaves, stood a dilapidated structure. It might have been a hunter's blind or a forester's shack once, decades ago. Now it leaned precariously, half swallowed by ivy and the grasping roots of the ancient trees. The wood was dark, almost black with age and damp, and the air around. It hung heavy with the smell of decay and that faint, rusty sweetness I'd noticed before. Kalen pushed open the creaking door with a flourish. Home, sweet home. Inside, it was surprisingly sturdy, if cramped and gloomy. Rough wooden benches lined two walls, and a crude table sat in the center. Faded patches on the walls suggested where things might have once hung. But it was the carvings that immediately drew my eye. Scratched into the dark wood everywhere were symbols. Some looked like standard initials and dates, typical kid stuff. But others were different. Strange, spidery sigils, spirals that seemed to draw the eye inwards. Stick figures with too many limbs or unnervingly blank faces. Some looked ancient, weathered deep into the grain. Others looked disturbingly fresh, the raw wood pale against the dark surface. Lorien immediately went to a corner, pulled out his sketchbook, and began adding to a complex, unsettling pattern on the wall. His movements fluid and practiced. The ossuary became our sanctuary. We met there almost every afternoon after that. We'd bring snacks pilfered from our kitchens, tell stories, complain about school, about Whisper Creek, about our parents. It felt like a bubble, a pocket dimension away from the town's oppressive quiet and watchful eyes. For the first time since moving, I felt like I had friends, a place I belonged. But the unease never fully left. Sometimes, huddled inside playing, cards by flashlight as the afternoon light faded, we'd hear it, a distinct snap of a twig just outside, too heavy for a squirrel. We'd freeze, Kalen holding a finger to his lips, Jorah's eyes wide, Lorien pausing mid-draw. But when Kalen or Jorah cautiously peered out, there was never anything there, just the silent, looming trees. Other times, it was shadows. The light filtering through the grimy window panes would shift, and for a split second, you'd swear you saw a tall, thin figure standing just beyond the clearing, watching before it melted back into the deeper gloom. Kalen laughed it off, As nerves, Jorah muttered about the woods playing tricks. But Lorien would just stare out the window, his gaze distant, before returning to his increasingly frantic sketching. His drawings became darker, elongated figures lurking behind trees, symbols mirroring the fresher carvings on the walls. Sometimes a recurring image of a girl with wide, terrified eyes that looked disturbingly like the photo of Alara Thorne. Then we started finding things. One day, a small, brightly colored hair ribbon lay snagged on a bush near the ossuary door. None of us recognized it. Another time, Jorah found a small, smooth gray stone placed precisely in the center of the table inside, marked with one of Fi, the strange spiral symbols Lorien drew. We accused each other half-heartedly, but no one confessed. It felt like messages, offerings, or warnings. Our encounters with Mr. Abernathy, the Historical Society curator, also took on a more sinister edge. I bumped into him at the library. He smiled that thin, bloodless smile and asked how I was settling in, if I'd been exploring the local heritage. His eyes lingered on the faint scratches on my arms from pushing through undergrowth. He recommended a book, a collection of local folklore, filled with tales of people vanishing in the woods, strange lights, and whispers on the wind. He tapped a particular passage about offerings needed to appease the old ones of the forest, his finger tracing a symbol identical to the ones Lorien drew and the one on the stone we found. He started humming that dissonant tune again, low under his breath. It made my blood run cold. We talked about Ilara more, piecing together the sparse details we'd gleaned. She was last seen walking home from school, taking a shortcut near the old logging trail, the same trail that led towards the ossuary. Kaelin insisted it was a coincidence, maybe a runaway or a tragic accident. Jorah wasn't so sure, nervously cracking his knuckles. Lorien just drew, his pictures getting darker, showing the stick figures now surrounding a smaller, falling figure. The rule, never stay past dark, felt heavier now, less like parental nagging and more like genuine wisdom. But the intrusions, the sense of being watched even in our secret place, paradoxically pushed us towards defiance. Kaelin brought it up first, cloaked in bravado. This whispering hour crap? It's just stories to scare kids. We should prove it. Stay the night. Show everyone we're not afraid. Jorah protested immediately. Are you crazy? After finding that stuff? With what? Abernathy said? Abernathy's a creepy old nut job, Kaelin shot back. And it's probably just other kids messing with us. We stay one night, prove nothing happens, and they'll leave us alone. Plus, his grin returned, it'll be an adventure. Lorien, surprisingly, nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on a fresh, sharp carving near the doorframe that hadn't been there yesterday. Maybe we need to see, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I was terrified. Every instinct screamed at me to run home and never look back. But the thought of backing down now, of being the scared city kid, was worse. And some small, morbid part of me was curious. What really happened in the woods after dark? What were the whispers? Against my better judgment, fueled by Kaelin's confidence, Lorien's strange acceptance, and my own desperate need not to be the outsider again, I agreed. We made a plan, gathered extra batteries, more junk food than we could possibly eat, sleeping bags. We'd tell our parents we were staying at each other's houses. One night, we'd face the whispering hour, face the legend, and prove it was nothing. We were so stupid, so young and stupid. The walk to the ossuary that evening felt different. The usual afternoon shadows seemed deeper. The silence, heavier. We tried to keep the mood light. Kaelin cracking jokes, Jorah pretending not to be nervous, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. We didn't stash our bikes this time. We left them hidden just off the main path, a silent acknowledgement that we might need a faster escape. As we pushed through the final tangle of branches into the small clearing, the ossuary looked less like a refuge and more like a trap, hunkered down under the darkening sky. Inside, we laid out our sleeping bags, the feeble beams of our flashlights, cutting through the dusty gloom. We ate chips too quickly, talked too loudly, the forced normalcy feeling fragile. Then, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, it began. The change was subtle at first. The chirping of crickets died abruptly. The usual rustling of small animals ceased. An unnatural, profound silence fell over the woods, heavier than any I'd experienced before. And then, the whispers started. It wasn't like wind. It was a low, sibilant murmur that seemed to emanate from the very wood of the cabin, from the air outside, from everywhere at once. Indistinct, yet unnervingly intimate, like secrets being shared just out of earshot. Lorien, hunched over his sketchbook, drawing with a speed that blurred his hands, his knuckles white. Jorah kept glancing at the boarded-up window, his face pale. Even Kaelin's bravado had vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped apprehension. The temperature plummeted, goosebumps rising on my arms despite the stuffy air inside. Then came the other sound, a scraping, dragging noise from the woods. Thump, scrape, thump, scrapey, heavy, uneven, like something heavy and limp being pulled over roots and stones. It was getting closer. Mixed with it, faint at first, but growing clearer, was humming. A tuneless, discordant hum that vibrated with a disturbing glee. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew that hum. Abernathy. A shaky yellow beam cut through the darkness outside, sweeping across the clearing. We scrambled away from the door, pressing ourselves against the far wall. The dragging stopped right outside. The humming grew louder, a grotesque lullaby. We held our breath, terror of physical weight in the small space. We heard him muttering, words lost in the omnipresent whispers of the woods. Then, with a sound like splintering bone, something slammed against the weakest part of the cabin wall, near the window Lorien had been staring at. Wood exploded inwards. Abernathy's face appeared in the ragged hole, illuminated from below by his trembling flashlight. It wasn't the face of the mild-mannered curator. His eyes were wide, gleaming with a terrifying, predatory light. His thin smile stretched into a rictus. Saliva dripped from his chin. He wasn't just crazy. He looked ecstatic, possessed. "Foundlings!" he hissed, the word cutting through the whispers. New offerings for the quiet ones. He lunged, his arm shooting through the hole, fingers scrabbling, grabbing for Lorien. Lorien screamed, a thin, high-pitched sound swallowed by the woods. Kaelin and Jorah reacted instantly, throwing themselves at the wall, trying to push him back, trying to barricade the hole with a loose bench. I fumbled with the rusted latch on the main door, my fingers slick with sweat. Abernathy roared, a sound utterly inhuman, and shoved with impossible strength. The bench splintered. He reached again, snagging Lorien's thin wrist. Lorien shrieked, again trying to pull away. Jorah grabbed a heavy flashlight and swung it wildly, connecting with Abernathy's arm. The curator recoiled with a snarl, momentarily loosening his grip. "Get him out!" Jorah yelled, shoving Lorien towards Kaelin and me as Abernathy stumbled back. But as Jorah turned, Abernathy lashed out, maybe with the tool he'd used on the wall, Maybe just his hand. I couldn't see clearly. And Jorah cried out, clutching, his arm as blood welled dark in the dim light. The door finally gave way under my frantic efforts. "Go!" I screamed. Kalen practically threw Lorien out the door ahead of him. I scrambled after them, Jorah stumbling behind, clutching his bleeding arm, his face a mask of pain and terror. We burst out into the clearing just as Abernathy squeezed through the hole he'd made, his silhouette impossibly tall and gaunt against the faint light filtering through the trees. We didn't run towards the bikes. We scattered, plunging blindly, into the surrounding woods, into the heart of the whispering hour. Branches tore at my clothes, roots tripped my feet. The whispers seemed to swirl around me, louder now, mocking, coaxing. Behind me, I could hear Abernathy's heavy, crashing footsteps and that awful, gleeful humming pursuing us through the oppressive, watching darkness. I just ran, tears streaming down my face, convinced I could feel cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing onto the muddy track near the edge of the woods, gasping for air, the sounds of the town seeming impossibly far away. Hitting the back door of my house felt like breaking the surface after drowning. I hammered on it, sobbing, incoherent words tumbling out, when my dad finally wrenched it open, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Silas? What in God's name?" Seeing the state of me, muddy, scratched, hyperventilating, snapped him into action. "Mom, call 911!" The next hour was a blur of flashing lights, static-filled radio chatter, and the grim faces of police officers. My parents wrapped me in a blanket, trying to get sense out of my babbling account of Abernathy, the ossuary, the attack. They exchanged worried glances, maybe still half believing it was just kids getting spooked, until the first police car returned from the woods. They found the ossuary just as we'd left it, the wall smashed open, our sleeping bags and snacks strewn about, smears of Jorah's blood on the floorboards. They found the large burlap sack Abernathy had been dragging nearby, torn open on a sharp root. Inside, just damp earth, clumps of moss, and a single small tarnished silver locket, the kind a young girl might wear. Ilara's locket, later confirmed, by her heartbroken parents. Kalen was found hiding deep in a thicket not far from the clearing, shivering uncontrollably, but physically unharmed. Jorah had made it back to the dirt road, weak from blood loss, his arm crudely bandaged with a torn piece of his shirt. He was rushed to the small clinic in the next town over. Lorien. They found Lorien wandering near the edge of town much later, near dawn. He was covered in mud and leaves, his eyes vacant, his precious sketchbook clutched tightly to his chest. He wouldn't speak. Not a word. When they finally coaxed the sketchbook from him, it was filled, page after page, with frantic, overlapping drawings. The spiral symbol, the tall, thin figure, Abernathy's manic face, and Ilara Thorne's terrified eyes repeated endlessly until the pencil lead had snapped. The search for Mr. Abernathy began immediately. Officers combed the woods. Dogs were brought in, but it was like he had vanished into thin air. The only trace was the discarded flashlight near the ossuary and the single set of footprints leading away from the cabin, deeper into the woods, before abruptly stopping in a patch of undisturbed leaves, as if he'd simply been lifted away. The town descended into a new kind of quiet, not watchful, but fearful. Doors were bolted earlier, curtains drawn tighter. Whispers turned from legend to terrified speculation. Had Abernathy taken Ilara? Had he been responsible for other disappearances, whispered about in the town's history? What was he? The police investigation turned to Abernathy's small apartment above the Historical Society. What they found cemented the horror. Books on ancient rituals, occult practices, local histories annotated with manic scribbles about appeasement, sacrifice, and the Whispering Ones. Maps marked with the spiral sigil, centering on the area around the ossuary, and, tucked away in a locked box, more small, personal items: a child's worn teddy bear, a single earring, a faded photograph of children who had disappeared from the area over the last 50 years, and, chillingly, Alara Thorne's other silver locket half, confirming his obsession and her fate. He hadn't just taken her, he'd been collecting. The official story became that Abernathy, a disturbed individual, had abducted and likely murdered Alara Thorne, and had perhaps been responsible for other cold cases. They suggested he'd likely fled the area after being discovered by us at the cabin. But no one in Whisper Creek truly believed he'd just left. Not after seeing the look in his eyes, not after hearing the whispers themselves. The police tape around. The ossuary eventually came down, but no one went near it. The woods reclaimed it quickly, the smashed wall overgrown, the carvings fading under new layers of moss and time, becoming just another dark footnote in the town's uneasy history. We boys, the survivors, drifted apart. The shared terror was too great a burden for friendship to bear. Kalen became withdrawn, his easy confidence replaced by a haunted look. Jorah recovered physically, but the scar on his arm was a constant reminder, and he rarely spoke of that night. Lorien remained, mostly silent, his drawings the only window into his fractured mind, filled with woods that watched and shadows that moved. I tried to process it, tried to fit Abernathy into the neat box of a human monster. But the whispers, I still heard them sometimes, on nights when the wind was just right, and the dragging sound that echoed in my nightmares. Was he just a man? Or was he something else? An instrument of whatever ancient, hungry thing lived in the heart of Whisper Creek woods, appeased by offerings? The police report didn't mention the unnatural cold, the feeling of the forest watching, the sheer wrongness of Abernathy's strength and glee. Years have passed since that night in the ossuary. We eventually moved away from Whisper Creek, my parents unable to shake the feeling of dread that permeated the town after the truth, or part of it, about Mr. Abernathy came out. I never saw Kalen, Jorah, or Lorien again after we left. Sometimes I wonder what became of them, if they ever managed to escape the shadow of that night, if Lorien ever spoke normally again. Mr. Abernathy was never found. No body, no trace, no sightings anywhere else. He simply ceased to exist, absorbed back into the local lore, becoming the new boogeyman whispered about during the Whispering Hour. A cautionary tale about a deranged curator, or perhaps something more. A servant of the woods, taken back by his masters when his work was interrupted. The official file remains open, another unsolved disappearance tied to those silent, watchful woods. Alara Thorne's body was never recovered from that burlap sack, only the locket. The town held a memorial, another cold spot added to its history. Her faded poster eventually disappeared from the lampposts, replaced by the relentless cycle of seasons. But her absence, like Abernathy's presence, lingers. For me, the fear never truly faded. It lives in the quiet moments, in the rustle of leaves outside my window at night, in the way shadows stretch and distort in the twilight. I understand the rules now, the ones born from fear and maybe, just maybe, from a terrible wisdom. The simple rule we broke: never stay past dark. It wasn't just about parental paranoia or small-town superstition. It was a boundary, a truce with something ancient and patient that waits in the quiet places, in the deep woods. We stumbled into its territory, interrupted its ritual, and saw the face behind the town's placid mask. We were lucky. Abernathy, or whatever was wearing his skin, that night was interrupted. He only took Ethan's leg, Jorah's blood, Lorien's voice, and my peace of mind. He could have taken so much more. Sometimes I still feel like I'm running through those woods, the whispers swirling around me, the discordant humming getting closer. I wake up sweating, my heart pounding, the rusty sweet smell thick in the air. We went looking for adventure, for a place to belong, and found instead the terrifying truth that sometimes the quietest places hide the loudest screams, and the deepest woods hold the darkest secrets. And the whispers, they're always waiting, just beyond the light.